أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه وخاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين سيد الأولين والآخرين شفيع المذنبين رحمة للعالمين محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين اللهم صل على محمد ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. Assalamu alaikum, my dear brothers and sisters. First of all, Kushal Mubarak to you on the wiladat of Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala. Don't know, I have my mobile phone here with me. It's the only time when people are allowed to have mobile phones because I have to finish for your iftar. So, salawat please. Allahumma salli ala. Just to begin with a hadith from our dear second Imam before I go into the main topic. The Imam has interestingly said about what annihilates society. And this is reported in Biharul Anwar, volume 78, page 111. He says, Halakun nas, the destruction of human beings, fi thalathin, are in three things. Al-kibr, hirs, wal-hasad. Pride, greed and jealousy. It's a very concise hadith, but it has a lot of meaning. He says that the destruction of human beings lies in three arguably simple traits that we all perhaps have. One is kibr. If I am prideful or if I am arrogant, it means that I will not listen to anybody else. I will believe I'm the best. I'll believe I'm right. I won't listen to any of you. And hence society is destroyed because I do not value your opinion. And because I don't value your opinion, how can society progress? What happens if my opinion is so terrible that it ends up being harmful for society? So kibr, a seemingly individual trait, has a very terrible effect on the rest of society. And then hirs, which is greed. If I am greedy, I will of course not share my wealth, my time and resources with you. And we know today, as many statistics show, that most of the world's wealth are in a few people's hands. And that is why, of course, we see poverty and we see wars. Hence, the simple trait of me being greedy has a further effect on society. And finally, hasad, jealousy. If I am jealous in front of all of you, and I'm jealous to all of you, it means my animosities towards you will be a cause for me to fight you, will be a cause for me to go and attack you. It seems very simple, but the harnessing of these traits is so important because otherwise society does destroy itself. When you look at Al-Hasan alayhi salam's life, the amount of patience that he had to have to perform that pact with Muawiyah, to restrain all of these things that he felt that actually he was entitled to lead the Muslim community. That in itself shows that the second Imam prevented the destruction of the society through his own patience and through removing his own kibr. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevate his station. Salawat please. Now going on to the title of this four-part series, Islam in the West, Conflict and Challenges. I argued last time, and I ended on this figure, that in amongst our libraries and academia, 13.1% of our works, and this is rising, and I predicted maybe this will go up to 20%, that perhaps 13.1% of the works that we have in our libraries are Islamophobic, which means they intentionally set out to paint Islam in a very barbaric way. And I'm going to share some other figures with you. The second point of conflict is not just that people may see Islam as the other, that actually Islam is something else, as something barbaric. But the second point of conflict is actually that there is a conflict between those people that may see the world in a human-centric way and those who may see the world in a God-centric manner. Now, what this means is that if I see myself, or human beings see themselves, as the pioneers of justice and rights, and that is where everything ends, then there's no other reference point except human beings. Whereas those who see the world as God-centric see themselves, to be honest, as very secondary. That whatever claims we may make on society, there is still another being, which we may say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which makes decisions about the world. Now you may say, well, okay, we know this. And yes, this is how the world is. We have religious people and maybe non-religious people. But there's something very specific here. In human rights, which is perhaps one of the constant terminologies that we use today in society, this becomes a particular case in point or point of conflict. Nicol describes human rights as the following. Human rights are basic moral guarantees that people in all countries and cultures allegedly have simply because they are people. Now, you may say, well, we know this, but look at the language here. This is, by the way, a very common definition of human rights. We have human rights simply because we are people. We deserve them automatically. It doesn't matter if we may behave like animals, but we all deserve human rights. Calling these guarantees rights suggests they attach to particular individuals who can evoke them. I have the power to invoke my human rights wherever I go. That they are of high priority and that compliance with them is mandatory rather than discretionary. When I say you have invaded my right of privacy, I expect you to respect my claim. By priority, mandatory. And human rights are frequently held to be universal in the sense that all people have them, all people should enjoy them. And they are to be independent in the sense that they are free from any standard of criticism, and they are to be implemented regardless of any country or any culture. What does this tell us? When, as I've said, after the Woolwich murder, we saw a few debates, we saw certain statements in the media, both for and against, by the Woolwich murder, it tells us, salawat please, it tells us that people seem to have a problem with religious people claiming that rights are with God. Whereas religious people will say, excuse me, but human beings are rather arrogant by saying they have rights because they are not totally independent. Therefore, the particular point of conflict here is whose worth and whose dignity is more valid. Is it Allah's or is it human beings? And if you say it is human beings, then God is removed from the equation. When you look at Islam, we are one of the few world religions which still claim that the Quran is uncorrupted, that we pray 5 times daily, and that we fast in the month of Ramadan, that we go on pilgrimage, and we have arguably the largest gathering in these places. Now, if you look at this world religion of Islam, it tells us that we maintain an active link with Allah. The Quran is uncorrupted, it's still a constant miracle upon us. Whereas other religions still may have a lot of debate about whether their scripture is corrupted, but arguably not us. And we pray in a very regimented fashion. And that is why there's a kind of fear that these Muslims have an active link with Allah and they still give dignity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We say this in our du'as, though we may not really use this language of human dignity. Let me give you this example. In Du'a Kumail, we say the following. We say, Allahumma inni as'aluka bi rahmatika allati wasi'at kulla shay wa bi quwwatika allati qaharta biha kulla shay wa qad'alaha kullu shay wa dhallalaha kullu shay. These beautiful sentences or verses which we recite mean what? Oh Allah, I ask you by your mercy which embraces all things, and by your strength through which you dominate all things, and to which all things are humble, and before which all things are lowly. In our basic du'as, we are proclaiming the dignity and worth of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala beyond our own. We claim constantly that it is you, O Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that dominate us, that make us humble. Whereas when you look at language today, which proclaim or discuss human dignity, it does not discuss or make any reference point about a transcendental being. And therefore the fundamental point of conflict within the Islam-West debate is we are giving credence to a being that is greater than ourselves. And so the debate is not just, as I have said last week, that it is superficial, that we're talking about what Islam has contributed, that it is about Muslims' actions and not Islam. No. It is about the ethos and the theology of Islam, which still today gives respect and a reverence to the Almighty. And that is why, as I have said in previous gatherings, that the fourth Imam alayhi salam has said that the greatest right upon us is that of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because He has created us. Salawat, please. So what does it tell us? It tells us that one of the key points of conflict is a theological conflict, that we are giving due power to Allah, whereas perhaps those people that may say, no, you should not give due power to Allah, wish to have power only in the human being's hands. So how do we, if you like, resolve this conflict? How is it being resolved? One of the ways in which it is being resolved is through dialogue, and this is a particular mode of resolution. Dialogue derived from daya, which means across or through, and logos means conversation, word, means what? That we are through conversation and words meant to cross the other side and understand the other people. So if you, for example, have a Islam and Christian and Jew debate, or if you have an Islam and West debate, etc., the whole purpose is for us to understand each other. Now, there is, of course, a merit in this mode of resolution, and I'm not trying to criticize it automatically. But one of the weaknesses that it does have is that it does not come up with any practical solutions or any practical models by which we can move forward. If I have this dua in my tradition, and I do want to give respect to my Creator, then how is it that today I'm meant to derive rights for human beings whilst respecting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Is dialogue and is simple debate going to resolve that for us? One of the arguments which I do have, which I believe will not resolve this at all, I don't believe dialogue will do this for us, is 2 or 3 arguments. One of the key people, by the way, it doesn't matter whether we are Muslim or non-Muslim here because we still use dialogue, is Anne Elizabeth Mayer, who argues the following. She says, Islamic heritage offers many philosophical concepts, humanistic values and moral principles that are all well adapted for use in constructing human rights principles. Such values and principles abound or are there even in the pre-modern Islamic intellectual heritage. How wonderful this is, she says. Now, I'm giving you an example of somebody that has written a work on dialogue, and there are many works of dialogue, and I've read so many of them. But this doesn't tell me anything about how I'm meant to resolve this conflict between those people that have a problem giving respect to Allah and those people that have a problem that giving respect to human beings. So what does it tell us? It's very wonderful for her to tell me this. And whenever I read these works, I say, well, this is the 100th person that has told me that my own religion has something wonderful to offer. So why should I buy that book and why should I go and have dialogue with that person? It doesn't make any difference. I don't need to be told that the Prophet was a wonderful human being. I don't need to be told that the Prophet was there for makarimul akhlaq. So if you really think about it, having lovely conversations or interfaith dialogue, generally speaking, does not have any benefit beyond the immediate relationships it may foster. And what is the proof in the pudding for this? Let me now share with you some certain statistics. Just please have in your mind that 13.1% and rising were Islamic phobic works. So how many people today write books that want to engage in peaceful means or dialogue with the way that I have described? What is the figure? Saeed Reza Amili says the following. Out of 23,872 works in his sample, 2,042 works, which is 8.6%, engage themselves in what is known as Islamophilia. What is Islamophilia? Islamophilia means the following: it is an effort to understand Islamic values and to maintain dialogue with Muslims despite their diverse value system, he says. In this way, the attempt is to iron out history-long prejudices and to engage in a scientific investigation of Muslims and Islam. 8.6%. So that means that 8.6% of works in your library will be of dialogue. And when I looked at the graphs, and Sayyid Raza Amali also attests to this, these works either are stagnant or, or are on the decrease. So you have works which are rising, which are Islamophobic, engaging in a hatred towards Islam, and they may rise to, let's say, 20%. And you have 8.6 works, and maybe these are decreasing, let's say, to 5%, which are engaging in peaceful dialogue. So there's a kind of paradox here. Yes, it is wonderful to have works on dialogue which want peace. And okay, that's good, but these are on the decrease anyway. Why are works of dialogue on the decrease and works of hatred towards Islam on the increase? Now, he hasn't said this, but this is my own analysis, and you may disagree with me here. I think one of the reasons why dialogue works fail is because they are not combative. They don't rustle any feathers. They're not there to suggest anything alternative. They will tell you, well, look at the Prophet, he was wonderful and he increased the rights of women. But they will not go beyond that. And so dialogue works will fail because they will not give you any practical solution to remove things like the Woolwich murder which may occur in society. They won't tell you how to do that. They won't give you an alternative model to think about rights and dignity in Islam. And arguably that is why they may fail. And number two, in our technologically led society, and this is now very common, you'll have so many lectures on YouTube, so many people that may have websites, lecturers, Muslim or non-Muslim, by the way, and they will say that we are there, and you may look at many, I've done some research on this, they will say that these are world questions and these are peaceful answers, or that these lectures are there to talk about dialogue with everybody. Well, that's very wonderful, and anybody can do this, by the way. Doesn't matter whether you have to study Islam or not. But all of these things avoid the points of conflict which I have discussed. How is it that we are going to resolve this point, this theological point of conflict? I still today, as we recited in Dua al-Iftitah on Thursdays, I still want to proclaim that my Creator has greater dignity. And I want to acknowledge that rights do come from Him. I want to say that. I do believe that I am not the best, that I am not the most independent decision maker. At the end of the day, I might be wrong. So what happens if I've derived a wrong right for society? And I still want to proclaim, therefore, that there is a reference point greater than myself. So our lectures and our orators and our YouTube and media are going to resolve that. They're not going to resolve that, in my humble view. I feel that we need to create more works which are going to give alternative models and resolve these points of conflict. Salawat, please. So, my humble argument here is that we should be rather specific about this Islam and West debate as to what is actually happening in our libraries, what works are being written, and whether the amount of lectures that we may give, including my own, will be of any benefit. Rather, there should be a lot of groundwork and hard graft that needs to be done by Muslims to actually think about these points of conflict. And then there is a second figure which I would like to share with you. Now, this figure is to do with works of Islam overwriter, which means what? These works intend to avoid stereotyping either Islam or Muslims by simply generalizing what is already known about one singular aspect to the whole object of the study. They dedicate their work to understanding Islam and Muslims in their own context. So today you will find lots of books in your library or university, Muslims of Southeast Asia, Muslims in the UK, Muslim conversion. This is very common now, by the way, and you'll get a job very easily if you mention that in your CV. Yes? If you say that you want to write works about Muslims in their own geographical context, you will get a job very easily and you'll get a book contract very easily. I tell you that from experience. That is really how the academic climate works. Now, why am I sharing this with you? What these kind of works do is they try to say that Islam or Muslims are particular entities within the world which need to be analyzed. We need to be analyzed in a microscope or through a microscope because we're very interesting to people. We wear a different type of dress. We are worshipping in a particular way. We have very exotic cultures. So you'll have loads of works in this category. And what is the figure here? He says that these works actually are a low percentage. Despite the interest in them, only 10.5% of the over 23,000 works constitute works which show that they want to analyze Muslims in their own context, whether Iraqis or Iranis or Pakistanis, whatever. And a lot of these works are on the rise. In fact, more recently, a journalist contacted me saying, please, can you tell me very specifically about how Khoja Shia Ithnashis or Iraqi Shia Ithnashis, when they came into this country, how have they set up specific institutions, and we all know many exist in London, including this one. They actually wanted to know what's their constitution and the history and the formation. And this is I'm just giving you recent interests or recent works which are being written. What does it tell us? Whilst it's a good thing, that it's good to have works about Muslims in themselves, but I'm playing devil's advocate, I'm trying to be objective and fair. The negative of it is that we are still regarded as a group within society that needs to be analyzed, rather than a group which, to be honest, has something to contribute within society like any other. Now you combine the percentages of 10.5% and 8.6%. 19.1% of works in libraries and in universities will analyze Muslims for themselves, which is very nice. But you have 13.1% and rising of Islamophobic works. And therefore, you may predict 15% or maybe going towards 20% are still works which are engaging in hate towards Islam. So despite the many efforts of the very Muslim academics that you have invited to this center, still 19.1%, in contrast to 13.1% and rising. That's two groups combined in comparison to just one group of Islamophobia. So look at what's happening in society. You find that despite the noble efforts of Muslim and non-Muslim academics, still you find that it is not enough to combat the rising fear, if you like, of Islam as a dualistic kind of religion as the other. Salawat, please. So I'm again sharing this with you that we have moved on in this debate of hopefully showing that really we must talk about what dignity means to you and I today, especially from our du'as and from our Quranic sources. And number two, instead of engaging in peaceful dialogue, let's actually come up with works which are rather provocative, which actually engage in an analysis of what we can contribute. I know it's Ramadan and I know you get tired. I'll allow perhaps 5 minutes just before namaz of questions, just as brain stimulation, inshallah. So I just open it up, please, inshallah. Is that okay? Yeah, sorry. I'm just judging the audience, yeah, so. That I should have assumed if you have the brain power to ask a question. That's presumptuous of me. So, inshallah, if you want to say anything.
Assalamu alaikum. You had mentioned contributing that there needs to be a rise of sort of works showing Muslims contribute. What are you exactly referring to? What sort of contributions? Contributions to the economy? I mean, most of us work. So what exactly are you referring to when you mean contributions and contributions that make it to works?
Jazakallah. I'm going to perhaps deal a bit with this more in the next two lectures. But what I mean by that is, I have talked about this before, but when you say things like leadership or teaching or ways of voluntarism or maybe scientific advances, for example, or ways in which we can look at scripture, we don't always have to look at things internally. We don't always have to say that we have a human rights problem, or we don't have to always say that it's now us that have to engage because we're on a back foot. We can contribute something in a very universal way, as many previous Muslim scientists and scholars did. So I'm just saying that we should rather look at society in a more universalized way and, to be honest, try to impact ways in which other people do things as well. There are many different ways of working and leadership and many other ways of science, and it's good for us to contribute that. I want to just give one simple example. To answer your question, I was invited recently just to write a chapter about the soul in an encyclopedic work which tried to combine philosophy and science from the Islamic perspective. Now, we have many encyclopedic works, you'll find so many, which talk about the nafs, so many, from Ibn Sina and Nasiruddin Tusi and others. But this encyclopedia was very different. It says, what do we have within our traditions, which actually, if we go back, try to combine science as well as perhaps spirituality through the entities of the nafs and the ruh. What kind of links have prophets or imams, have scholars made that try to make these links? So our liver, how is it connected to which part of the soul? And then how does that affect our brain function and all that? And I found very few works in this category. So just to answer the sister's question, that's what I mean. Why can't we look within our traditions and try to make certain proactive links? Hopefully I've been clear there, inshallah. Maybe it's 10 past 9, so yeah, inshallah. Inshallah. Salawat, please. So just Surah Al-Fatiha, please, for all of our marhumin, inshallah. Thank you.